Do you know what it feels like to be called controlling by the same woman who thought hiding her lover in our garage for 3 straight days was a reasonable plan? That question has been replaying in my head ever since, because every time I think about it, I still can't decide if I should laugh, scream, or just shake my head at the sheer absurdity of it all. When people talk about betrayal, they usually mean the subtle kind. Text messages, late nights, a lipstick smudge that doesn't belong to you. But my story went so far past subtle it landed in the territory of a dark comedy I wouldn't believe myself if I hadn't lived it. It started small, the way these things always do. We'd been arguing for months. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same accusation. You're too controlling. I'd ask her to let me know if she'd be late from work. Controlling. I'd suggest we set a budget because our credit card bills were ballooning. Controlling. I'd tell her I was uncomfortable with how often she was going out with that new friend from her job. Controlling. I was starting to think maybe I really was the problem, that maybe my concern, my care, my desire to keep us on track was some toxic flaw. But then came the day that blew the lid off everything. I work from home most days, which she seemed to forget. That morning she left in a rush, said she was running errands before meeting up with her sister. Nothing unusual except she left her laptop open on the kitchen table. Normally I wouldn't touch it. I'm not the kind of guy who but something about how quickly she'd bolted set my stomach twisting. And when I walked past and saw an email notification pop up on the screen with the subject line, "Can't believe we pulled it off," my curiosity swallowed my guilt whole. I grinned, and that was the moment my life tilted sideways. It wasn't an affair confession. No, it was worse. It was a thread between her and a man whose name I vaguely recognized from her office. They weren't just sleeping together, they were laughing about how easy it was to keep me distracted, about how he'd been in the spot all weekend while I was home, and how careful they had to be with the dog not sniffing around too much. My blood turned to ice. What spot? What the hell did that mean? It didn't take me long to find out. I stormed into the garage, every nerve in my body on fire, and for a moment I thought I'd lost my mind, because there, crouched behind a stack of moving boxes, was a grown man, haggard, sweaty, eyes wide like a kid caught stealing candy. He had a blanket balled up in the corner, an empty water bottle at his feet, and my toolbox sitting open like he'd been using it. My garage. My damn garage. I didn't say a word at first. Neither did he. We just stared at each other like two animals caught in headlights. And then when he finally stammered out something about just crashing here for a bit, I laughed. Not because it was funny. God, it wasn't. But because the sheer insanity of it short-circuited my anger. He wasn't a teenager sneaking in after curfew. He wasn't a friend down on his luck. He was her lover. The man she chose over me, and she'd shoved him into my garage, like a dirty secret, convinced I'd never find out. I told him to get out. Right then, right there. He scrambled, muttering apologies that meant nothing, grabbing his phone, his shoes, stuffing things into a backpack, and as I stood there, watching him trip over himself to escape, all I could think about was her words, echoing in my head. You're too controlling. Me, the controlling one. While she was literally keeping another man hidden 20 feet from where I slept. When she came home later, I didn't even confront her immediately. I sat on the couch, quiet, waiting. She walked in, kissed my cheek, acted like everything was normal, and that's when I realized something chilling. She wasn't sorry. She didn't feel guilt. She genuinely believed she had me so under her thumb, so convinced of my flaws, that she could gaslight me into thinking I was the crazy one forever suspecting anything. I finally asked her, calm as I could manage, "So how long were you planning on hiding him in the garage?" Her face froze. I'll never forget it. The way the blood drained, the way her lips trembled, the way her eyes darted everywhere but at me, and then instead of crumbling, instead of begging for forgiveness, she doubled down. She said I'd left her no choice, that my so-called controlling nature forced her into secrecy, that if I'd just trusted her more, she wouldn't have had to do it. Can you believe that? I was standing there, shaking with the betrayal of knowing another man had been sleeping under my roof while I made dinner, while I walked the dog, while I lived in ignorance, and she tried to spin it like it was my fault. Like her hiding an affair partner in the garage for 3 days was the natural consequence of me asking her to text me if she'd be home late. That's when something inside me shifted. The anger didn't erupt, it cooled, hardened. I looked at her not as the woman I'd loved for years, but as a stranger. Someone who could warp reality so badly, She'd convinced herself hiding a man in my garage was somehow rational. And in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to break things. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a dramatic fight. I was going to take control. Real control. Over the next few days, while she scrambled to spin her story, I started moving with quiet precision. I pulled every financial record, checked the mortgage paperwork, the bills, the accounts, every place where my name mattered, and hers didn't. I realized, with a bitter sort of relief, that she'd been too careless to think ahead. The house, mine. The car she drove, leased in my name. Even the utilities, my accounts. Piece by piece, I understood that while she thought she was outsmarting me, she'd built her secret life on a foundation that belonged entirely to me. She thought she was clever. But I had patience, and patience, in betrayal, is the sharpest weapon. I didn't expose her immediately. Instead, I let her think she was still in control, that I was just sulking, licking my wounds. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. Photos of the garage setup, screenshots of the emails, notes of dates and time. Because if she wanted to call me controlling, I'd show her what controlled really looked like. And you know what? The strangest thing was how clear my mind felt. No more second guessing. No more gaslighting. No more wondering if I was overreacting. I had the truth in my hands, undeniable and ugly. And instead of crushing me, it freed me. I didn't have to prove myself to her anymore. I didn't have to win her trust back, or fight for scraps of affection. I had the evidence. I had the leverage. And soon enough, I'd have the last word. But here's the kicker. The garage incident was only the beginning. It wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just about one man hiding in the shadows. Once I started peeling back the layers, I realized how deep her lies went, how many secrets she'd been tucking away, convinced I'd never noticed. And if you think the story of finding him crouched behind a stack of boxes was wild, wait until I tell you what happened when I started exposing everything she'd been hiding. That's part 2. And believe me, it only gets crazier from.
I didn't sleep the night after I caught him in the garage. You'd think I'd be pacing, angry, punching walls or drowning myself in whiskey. But it wasn't like that. I sat there in the dark living room with the dog at my feet, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, thinking. The anger was there, yes, but it wasn't loud. It was sharp, cold, like a knife I'd been handed and suddenly realized I had every right to use. For years she'd made me believe I was the problem, too controlling, too watchful, too cautious. But the truth was, if I hadn't been paying attention at all, that man might have stayed in my garage forever. The next morning she tried to play it off like nothing happened. She brought me coffee, sat on the arm of the couch, and gave me that smile she used when she wanted to smooth over a fight. And I remember staring at her, wondering how many mornings she'd handed me a mug while another man was hiding 20 feet away. I asked her straight, why? Not angry, not shouting, just that one word. And her answer, she blamed me again. She said I suffocated her, that I watched too closely, that she couldn't breathe. And all I could think was, if I suffocated you so badly, how the hell did your lover breathe in my garage for 3 days without me noticing? I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I let her talk, let her spin her version of events, let her cast me as the villain in her little drama. Because at that point I knew words were useless. The only thing that mattered was action. So I acted. Over the following weeks, I built a quiet case, screenshots of her emails, photos of the garage setup, copies of the receipts where she'd been sneaking hotel charges onto our joint card. I even got security camera footage of her slipping into the garage late at night with bags of food for him. She had no idea I'd installed an extra camera after we were broken into last year. It felt almost cinematic, watching her sneaking around like a thief in her own home, feeding another man while I slept. And then when the timing was right, I started to pull threads. The first move was financial. I closed the joint account, shifted funds into my own. She came storming into the living room that night, waving her phone in my face, furious her card had been declined. I shrugged and told her I didn't think it was wise for us to share money while she was, entertaining tenants in the garage. Her face went pale. She screamed. She cried. She said I was vindictive, and I just sat there, sipping my drink, letting her words bounce off me like rain on glass. The second move was social. I didn't go public. Not yet.
But I started letting little truths slip in conversations with mutual friends. Not accusations, not stories, just seeds. Funny thing, I'd say. I caught someone in the garage the other night. Weird, or she's been spending a lot of time with that co-worker, haven't you noticed? People draw their own conclusions faster than you think, and soon enough, whispers turned into suspicions, suspicions turned into questions, and questions turned into side glances she couldn't ignore. The third move was personal. I stopped chasing, stopped explaining myself, stopped bending every time she snapped her fingers. I came home later than usual. I started hitting the gym again, taking the dog on long drives, visiting old friends I'd let slip away while I was busy keeping our crumbling house of cards upright. She noticed. She hated it. She accused me of trying to punish her. And maybe I was. But more than that, I was reclaiming pieces of myself she'd buried under manipulation and guilt. And then came the breaking point. One night she tried to flip the script entirely. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, and declared that if I didn't stop controlling her every move, she was leaving. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Good. Pack your things." She froze. She expected me to beg, to plead, to bargain. But I did, because the truth was, I didn't want her anymore. Not the version of her that hid men in garages. Not the version of her that twisted blame like a knife. She left. Stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled, and I sat there, alone, breathing, in the silence, like fresh air, after a storm. For the first time in years, felt peace. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, I got a call from her lover's wife. Turns out, he wasn't single. He had a family, kids, and she'd found the same emails I had. Except her discovery wasn't just about betrayal, it was about humiliation. She told me everything, how long it had been going on, the lies he'd told, the promises he'd made. And in return I told her about the garage, about the blanket, the bottles, the secret meals. We laughed, bitter, broken laughter. But in that moment we weren't enemies. We were co-survivors of the same lie. Word got out faster than wildfire after that. He lost his job when HR found out. Apparently office romances are frowned upon. When they spill into public scandal. She lost her friends, who couldn't look her in the eye without remembering the whispers. And me, I gained clarity. The last time I saw her, she came back to the house, standing on the porch with tears streaming down her face. She begged me to take her back. Said she'd made a mistake. Said she didn't know what she was thinking. And for a moment I almost pitied her. But then I remembered the man in my garage, crouched behind boxes like a rat, and I closed the door without saying a word. It's been months now. I still live in the house. The dog still curls up at my feet at night. And sometimes, when I walk past the garage, I think about how surreal it all was. That I could have been sleeping inches away from betrayal, wrapped in blankets and lies. But instead of bitterness, I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I found out. Gratitude that I walked away. Gratitude that I finally saw who she really was. If you asked me today whether I was controlling, I'd say this: I wasn't controlling. I was careful. I was loyal. I was committed. And if that made me the bad guy in her story, so be it. Because at least I never had to hide another life in someone else's garage just to feel alive.